Alright, this week we're going to cover JavaScript. Basically it's a language that pretty much controls everything in your web browser. So it comes really in handy to know. This is the DOM, or Document Object Model. Whenever your HTML is loaded into the browser, it gets broken into objects to be displayed or controlled. So obviously the base is the window object, and next is the document. That's really important. Everything branches out from the document, like your form, your images. As you can see, there's a hierarchy. One is attached to the other, or children of the other. This will come in handy in terms of how you're going to program with JavaScript. Okay, let's jump straight into it. So this is your typical, again, your typical HTML5 layout. Going to backtrack to HTML. It reintroduced forms, or introduce forms. We're not going to cover too much of a JavaScript. I mean, the topic itself is pretty large, so I'm going to try to cover what I think is helpful for you in building a mobile app, and using a form is useful in making a utility tool. Okay, so we start with a form. The form has several attributes: action, method. Okay, action is if you're doing a server call, the URL of the server script will go in here, but we're going to leave it blank, meaning that it will call itself. And method is either a post or a get. It's a way for form to transmit data to the server. Get would be through the URL field, and the post method is through the HTTP request, which you don't see. Okay, so that's that. Usually when you do fields, text fields, forms, usually when you do forms, you add them in tables to make it all look nice. The obvious way to do that instead is to use CSS and the label field. Okay, so let's say you want to make a name and then an input type text. Usually you give the input field another parameter called name and or ID. It's really important to do this, especially if you want to pass on if you want to pass values with a certain variable to get a value from a certain field. I'll get into that later. Email, input type text, name, email, BR. Okay, so that's pretty much our. Obviously there are other types of inputs like radio buttons, checkboxes, drop down menus. I'll just cover the checkbox for today. Label. Do input, select radio, and give it a name. What's different with the radio is you need to add a value as well. When you check a radio button, you need to send a value to a certain place. So this is where the value field comes in. Mail. I'll just copy and paste. I'll leave this blank. Female. Okay. Obviously, it doesn't look very interesting. We'll go ahead and style this, especially with the label. Display inline block. Insert width. Now everything's pushed away, so it's easier to read. As you can see, a lot easier than using tables to format a form. With the label, you can. There's also a attribute called for. This is so you can bind your label with your input field. So for name, you don't have to do this, but you can do it either way. Email. Okay. So that is form. Ideally, you can also give a form a name so you can access it with JavaScript or an ID. We'll do both as an example. We'll call it user. Okay, now on to JavaScript. JavaScript, you can place JavaScript in the head or in the body itself, but usually it's recommended to put it in the head. I think if you put it in the body, Internet Explorer will try to block the script for security reasons. So usually your script won't work on Internet Explorer if you put the script in the body itself. Okay, type text JavaScript and close JavaScript. So your code goes in between the script tag. First basic thing to do is to define a variable. If you're a novice to programming, period, a variable is basically a container that holds data, whether it's text, numbers, or whatever. The keyword is var, my variable. It could be anything. JavaScript doesn't care about types in terms of you don't have to define a data type. It'll try to figure it. It will try to figure it out by what your value is. So you can have in quotes or a number and so on. It's up to you. Next thing is a function. Basically, a function is a collection of code you can call multiple times whenever you need it, and it's defined as so function. let's call it validate. Okay. So basically, you call this function whenever you need it. As an example, I'll do alert. The alert is a function that pops up a alert button in your browser. And to call this function, you do like so. We'll test this in the browser. I don't think it works in Dreamweaver. Oh, it does. Ah, nice. So it pops up an alert window. Okay. You can call this function, you can call it anywhere from the JavaScript and even in the HTML itself. We know this works. Let's say we have a link, an href. Call validate. There's several ways to do this. The really old school way is you write JavaScript and you call the function in the link itself. You click on that, it pops up the alert window. The other way is you don't call anything from the href, but you invoke a browser event called onClick. This is a mouse event, obviously. It does the same thing. Usually you should do this rather than calling the JavaScript from the href. We left out an important button in the form. That is the submit button. Input type submit, name submit, and the value, which is the label that shows up on the button, submit. Okay. Now we have a submit button. And to call and to call the JavaScript function validate from the form, we put it in the form field on submit. Return validate. Okay, this calls the validate function. The reason for the return keyword is whenever you call a JavaScript function, you either return a false or true. A true meaning that everything's okay, and then the action field gets executed. Or if you return false, it will not call the action field. So basically, well, I'll show you. Return false, meaning that the action won't get called. I think it might be easier to see if I return true, meaning the action will be called. Actually, it's easier to see it in an actual browser. If you enter in your field You hit submit, hit hi, but see the action field gets called and it blanks out the field. If you don't want the action to be called, you set it to false. Submit. The page isn't refreshed. That means the action wasn't called. So those are the two differences. Another way to debug your JavaScript is to use, if you have Firebug installed on your Firefox, or if you view the developer kit in Safari. I'm not sure about the other browsers. Chrome as well. There's this thing called console log. It's helpful to sometimes debug and show developer. Web inspector. Okay, so you can see the log is outputted to there. Okay, the next topic I'll cover is arrays are basically a variable that can contain multiple values. So let's say var my array is equal to cat, dog, turtle. There are a few ways to define it. That's one way, the quick way. The other way is to do var is equal to new array, and you could manually define the array like so. Cat as you can notice, the position in the array is defined as a square bracket and then the index number. Dog, and so on. So if you try to access the value of the array, you could do alert. Let's say get the value of my array at the index of 1, which is dog. We can test it out. The alert dog pops up. Okay. So those are arrays. The reason why I brought up arrays is the next step for getting values in the form include arrays. If you think back to what I showed you with the DOM object, the document object model, everything is nested as a children of somebody else. You can access the form through arrays that way. Let's say you could do var form equals document forms. We called it user, and we can grab the name, the value of the name input, like so. So this is a multi-dimensional array. the name under user under a form in the document. And we grab the value. So we can do alert form. So if I enter in the name field, hit submit, the JavaScript grabs the value of the input name and put it into the alert box. Okay. The other way is to get element by ID. If you tag anything in your HTML with an ID, you can grab it. It doesn't have to be a form. So I could do document dot get element. Oh, spelled it wrong. Document get element by ID user. Actually, you could do this as well. Do name value. Alex is put into. As you can see, you could do it multiple ways. Doesn't really matter. The next thing I'll cover is if statements, conditionals. This is the workhorse of programming, really. So if you have a value and you need to test it against something, if condition is the way to go. Let's say I want to check if the fields are filled out or just left blank. So I can do form if form is equal to nothing or null. Alert, you need to fill okay. If you need to have multiple lines, you can do curly bracket, and you can add more code instead of just one line. Okay. So if I enter in something, I hit submit, everything's all right. If I leave it blank, I hit submit, the alert comes up. If your input form needs to enter in a number and you need to check the values of the numbers, that's handy as well. Let's say instead of name, we'll do age, just for the heck of it. Age. Okay. Instead of the name, do age. Let's say you're doing a site that requires the user to be above 13. You do if the value of age is greater than, actually is less than 13. Alert, you are under age. Okay. If we put 5, you are underage. Or if you put in 50, you're fine. Okay. Let's say, okay, I'm kind of sick of the alert boxes. I want to write my message straight into the HTML. I'll create a div tag, call it, give it an ID, call it output. Okay, it can be left blank because we're going to actually write HTML into this div tag. We'll style it too. Output. Give it a width. Give it a background. Select color. Okay. So instead of an alert box, I'll write document. Remember, everything is a child of, basically everything is a child of the document. Get element by ID. Output. And we'll invoke a DOM function called inner HTML and set it equal to you are underaged. As you can see, the message is written into the document itself. You can add things to the string, like you're underaged, you are only, and you add the value of the age, which is form. So as you can do, I'm only 9 or 8. You are underaged. You are only 8. I'll just mention that there's another way to define a function. You'll see this when we get into jQuery a bit. One way to do this is my func is equal to define an anonymous function and assign it to a variable. There are differences to the two methods. This is defined, I believe, during runtime, so when the browser is running the script, and this is defined before runtime. So it's a matter of access or getting the function. Okay, that's one thing we need to cover still. Getting the value of the radio buttons. It's not as cut and dry as a text field. So whenever you check a radio button, the value of checked is inserted into the input field. But we need a way to cycle through each item in the radio buttons, the radio button group. To do that, we need to use a loop. I'll delete this for now. We'll use the for loop right now. There are other loops like while and so on. But basically they function the same. They cycle through a group of a collection of things like an array or radio buttons or checkboxes. Let's test it out on the array we defined. So a for loop looks like this. The first block code is to define a index variable, and then it's separated by a semicolon. The next group is to test that variable. We know there's 3 items in the array right now, and the next group is to increment that variable. We'll see it in action. You'll understand it a little bit better. Let's do an alert. My array. Okay, basically what this is doing is it's cycling, using the index, it's cycling through the my array at each step. So the first one is cat, you hit OK, it jumps to the next one, dog, jump to the next one, turtle, and everything's done. That's what this increment is. And this next step, this test, basically tells you to do it 3 times. If I do it, let's say just 1, cat, it does it only once. 2, does it 2 times. As you can see, it's pretty straightforward. If I do too much, bigger than what the array is, should throw an error. Undefined, undefined, undefined. Okay? So let's say you're not exactly sure how many items are in the array. What you can do is you can say my array dot length. This is a function that automatically gets 3 from this array. So if I add another one, it'll automatically be 4. And I didn't need to change the code at all. Cat, dog, turtle, fish. Okay. So the same idea with this array goes to the radio box. So what you need to do is cycle through male, female, male and female radio box to see which one is checked, and then store the value. So what you do is for var I is equal to 0. If I is less than, actually we'll just get the form. So we could do form dot form sex dot length, or 2 I plus plus if form sex hit mail, submit, and comes up mail is checked. Okay. So we test if a certain radio button is checked. If it is, then this if condition becomes true. and then this is executed. Okay. You can do if it is true, but a shortcut would be if to do that as well. Either way should work.